drunk kitchen conversation style. Today we're going to discuss naturalism. And naturalism by definition is the belief, I'll read it, that nothing exists beyond the natural world. Instead of using supernatural or spiritual explanations, naturalism focuses on explanations that come from the laws of nature. And this definition, in general, it reminds me of definition of materialism conceptually. And I tend to agree with the materialistic view of the world. However, definition of naturalism is ambiguous because it contains several terms that are not defined. So it's kind of recursive definition. And because of that, the idea of naturalism enables creation of near-religious movements that have some dogmatic rules, set some presets for people to follow in order to remain in the bounds of naturalism. Simply because such things as natural world, supernatural, those things are not defined and they're subject to personal interpretations. And this is why when I start encountering people who preach naturalism as they understand it, I cannot relate to that because it doesn't pass my critical assessment of information. Whenever I process information, I usually pass it through some chain of logical questions and I try to challenge those beliefs. And that's why I pretty much don't belong to any school of thought, pretty much like some like generalized school of thought that has some dogma to follow. Because none of them fulfill my demand for being completely logical and making sense practically. So today I would like to discuss the modern school of naturalism and what I find to be contradictory in it. And in the end, nothing will be conclusive. It's just, I will be asking questions and analyzing. But in the end, it will boil down to my favorite concept. You will see. So, first of all, modern naturalism, naturalist movement reminds me of the people who sell the image of rich life. People who sell successful success. Because people who sell successful success, they show people and they demonstrate, they sell the idea of their fantasy of rich life. They don't live rich life. They sell the idea of rich life as they imagine it. This is the key thing. And so people have some collective impression of what rich life should look like, and they build some stereotype of it and they try to follow it. When in reality, living a rich life is not what it is as shown by those people in accordance to their fantasy. So naturalism is the same. Naturalism essentially, in my opinion, sells the idea of natural lifestyle as those people imagine it. And there are several things that don't make sense to me because they say that whatever we're doing now, whatever people are doing nowadays is unnatural and something else is natural. And I tend to disagree with this notion because what is natural in general when we think of Homo sapiens? A fully natural animal, let's say fully natural creature, would be the creature that has no free will. Because the origin of free will, origin of creatorship, and creative component is the one that defines a human, in my opinion. Realization, maximization of the creator potential is the fundamental, goal in human life that defines human life. But the creatures without free will and creatorship would be fully natural, which means that, by this definition, either we accept that creatorship, the curiosity, the people's inherent desire to study and experiment with the natural world around us is fully natural, given to us by nature, or it is completely unnatural in general. Which means that if we revert a human back to the state without the creatorship component, we're going to need to revert back to the species that are not Homo sapiens. Or again, we just accept that everything that human creates, that everything that we created is fully natural. And then, by this definition, everything that we have around us, the world that we have around us, is perfectly natural. And of course, within one generation, we only get to see several experimentations, several iterations of novel things that come up, and we need to kind of validate them or devalidate them and cancel them, such that the next generations will be developing on the basis of what we leave as the baseline for them. But within one generation, it may seem that, okay, this is some bullshit, this is something good, we should embrace it, this we should ditch. But rejecting the whole heritage of humanity, kind of seems to me not only counterproductive, but also completely unreasonable, because the world literally developed for you to be born whenever you were born, in the conditions that you were born in. Without everything that humans were doing preceding your birth, you would not be born. That's, I think, if you again think about it logically, that makes total sense. So the fact that you were born is fully enabled by all human creativity and progress that was preceding your moment of birth. So the mere fact that you were born is the product of human creativity and all the progress that preceded this moment. So this is what I think. And this is why my stance is that everything that we have around us right now is fully natural. Our duty is to filter what things are rather prolific and what things are rather harmful. But it's also very strange to me. Why would we choose some stage of development sometime in the past? Nobody specifies which century we should go back to, like what developmental stage of humanity we should go back to in order to live naturally. Because again, what is natural for Homo sapiens? The moment you start building a shelter, the moment you start strategizing something, you're already not natural by some weird definition of natural that completely ditches the defining component of human, which is creatorship. Then one of the things that naturalism preaches is to live impulsively. So whenever you feel any desire, you need to fulfill it on the spot. This is also something interesting to discuss, because developmental process of a child involves formation of such thing as superego. It is a controlling part of psyche that makes a child capable of coexisting with others, because initially the child is fully impulsive. They urinate, they defecate the moment they wanted, they scream to demand food whenever they wanted, and they are not willing to compromise or wait. They immediately signal about the pain, they don't tolerate the pain, so they scream, they signal immediately as discomfort comes about. But as they grow, they start developing superego. Superego forms in response to development of the brain as a whole, because humans are strategic and creative. If we look at the dogs even learned to suppress their impulses because they know that strategically it's much more beneficial to make friends with humans, not attack them. You make friends with humans and that secures you food. It secures you shelter. It secures you safety. Even dogs learned that there is a benefit to suppressing some impulses for the future continuous benefit, which reduces your level of stress, which increases your chances of survival. And this is how humans also develop throughout one human life and humanity as a whole. You can analyze your impulses and choose whichever you want to fulfill right now because they're critical, or whichever impulses are more beneficial if you kind of suppress them or redirect them or sublimate them into something else for better benefit. So this is another thing. So living in accordance to impulses is partially good, but not completely good, because there are some impulses that may be not beneficial for you, for your overall survival. And again, if you want to simplify your brain to being unable to analyze information, to be unable to predict and strategize, then okay, it's totally cool to live in accordance to the impulses. But this complex brain is the guarantee that you also will have a much more predictable, much more low stress life that will be much more interesting and fulfilling. And the aspect of the diet I would like to discuss separately, because there are schools of thought like raw veganism. Raw veganism has its own philosophical foundation that is rooted in what is natural, in the pursuit of natural lifestyle. Such book as Return to the Brain of Eden talks about it. And then carnivorism, animal-based diet, they're also deeply rooted in seeking truth in something that is virtually natural for a human, looking into things in the past, kind of like juxtaposing them to the history of human progress. And I would like to discuss it in a separate video because it's kind of probably loaded, and I would like to do some literature search for that topic. The calls to go back to nature, like ditch the cities, ditch the urban culture, suburbia basically, and go live in the forest. If we think like what is natural, what type of dwelling is natural for a human, what type of conditions, augmentations are natural for a human, nobody defines that. Is like a den in the ground natural, or is the dwelling made of sticks natural? then humans naturally imagine if you go to the forest and you live in the forest, you build yourself a shelter that is already kind of unnatural, even though a lot of animals instinctively build nests, a lot of animals instinctively build some shelter. Okay, some simple dwelling is natural. Okay, as a human, you realize that the dwelling made out of sticks and leaves may not be good, may not be comfortable. So you want to increase your comfort by minimizing the work input that you have to constantly perform in order to fix it all the time, to repair it all the time. So you start thinking, okay, I can invest a little bit of effort and build a more sturdy dwelling. And that more sturdy dwelling will not require me to do repairs as often, or it will be much more convenient for me, much more ergonomic. So you start building that. It's unnatural. It's by definition, it's unnatural. Yes, the simple dwelling, the simple shelter is natural because it's your survival thing. But any commodities that you would like to add, any minimization of work that you would like to introduce and strategize for the future will be unnatural. So this, like, go to the forest and ditch all civilizational features, all commodities of civilization. If you put yourself in the situation of virtually natural, you will inevitably, having the capacity of your brain that you have, you will inevitably start solving the problems that will bring you over centuries, that will bring you exactly where we are now. Because everything that originated in civilization, everything that originated in humanity, everything that we created, it had a reason to originate. When we look at our generation, yes, we are dealing with acute problems. Some of them are ridiculous, some of them we will resolve and move on, some of them will just fall off on their own without introducing any change in us. But we now live on the foundation of trial and error, of refinement, of selection of different features that made sense and that stayed, that got verified by the time, that got adopted by people through history and proved themselves to work for best survival of humanity. With that in mind, if you are to transfer yourself to some period in history, you will find that the system of so many elements as humanity will inevitably assemble to what it is now. Because humanity, nature, anthropogenic activity, or natural activities, they're all optimization problems. And when you're dealing with multi-element systems, it statistically can exist in equilibrium only in a very narrow range. So the results of those optimization problems are what we have now in nature and an anthropogenic subset of nature. So it's just how everything progresses in terms of statistics. Then another thing that naturalism preaches is that schooling and education are unnecessary as we have them now. Basically, it rejects certain part of human heritage and teaches that schooling should not be employed. So children should learn only the necessary skills that would enable their survival. Basically, how to build the simplest dwelling, simplest shelter, how to, in the most efficient way, harvest food, which is like to hunt, and how to, raise children. So these 3 features is what people kind of need to learn according to the naturalism. Basically, it rejects all the previous human heritage and tells us that no culture, no education are necessary. Because school is essentially, it oppresses human, it limits human cognition, and puts them in the framework that is completely unnecessary and limits human freedom. Humans are not free, and in this regard, we should think that naturalism through that rejects nature, because humans are born into nature, into natural laws. And when we say that we need to reject all human heritage, we say that we are against nature, because we reject the natural law of successive progression of events. And also, again, as with the example of that, you go to the forest, you build a dwelling, you notice that you will spend much less energy if you were to advance your dwelling and live more efficiently. It will take you much less energy if you, for once, you perform a creative act, refine your building, make it more convenient, make it sturdier, and then you will move on. So you will teach your children to not just build a simple shed, you will teach their children to build a more complex dwelling. And this, if you extrapolate it on more and more commodities and more advancements, then you will come to the current education system that teaches children all human heritage. Because several centuries ago, people didn't know electrodynamics. Now humans study electrodynamics in school as a part of physics class. Several centuries ago, there was no microscope. People didn't know about the bacteria. They didn't know about microscopic world. Now humans study that in 7th, 8th grade. that there is microscopic world and they can describe it. They can describe the living cell. They can describe the viruses, bacteria, and such. They study genetics. People now know it. So this is the heritage that we know. It just makes life more efficient, because if we prohibit children to learn the vastness of human heritage, then those children will not be able to fulfill the natural law. You will basically interfere with the natural flow of life. But moreover, this process will balance itself out, because children will still want to learn, because they are born not into vacuum, they're born into the human heritage. So the world that you know when you are born is the world that was created before, based on the knowledge that humans acquired beforehand. And so you not knowing what's the deal with the surrounding world makes you unable to effectively live in this world. If you were born into vacuum, okay, you can create languages from scratch, you can create descriptions of every element around you from scratch, but that again, or over the millennia, it will lead you to development of the same sciences, because we are, again, as I like to say, that we're self-aware projection of some subset of natural world. So we tend to ask questions and we tend to develop this way. Another thing where education is important, education and culture, is that life is for pleasure. The only driving force in life, the only driving force for any actions that we perform is literally pleasure. Even if people punish themselves, or there's a good word, something like that, they can perform acts of altruism and all of that. The only motivation behind it is pleasure, because it feels much better to perform those actions that may even be not pleasant in the moment, that because they will give a much stronger pleasure. But the more you know about the world, the more pleasures are available to you, because creatorship is the biggest pleasure that's available to human, and that's unlimited, because such pleasures as eating, such pleasure is chilling or playing, such pleasure is mating, such pleasure is sex, they are limited. You cannot reach some heights in those fields. There is only so much food you can eat. There is only so many types of sex that you can engage in, and those pleasures, they're finite. But creatorship is unlimited. So the more you learn how you could create, the more technologies you learn, the more tools, expressive tools you learn through getting education, the more pleasure you can be getting in life without any ceiling. Literally, you will have the unlimited tools and sources of pleasure that will be giving you stimulus to live and a lot of joy. This is why I also value education a lot, in whichever form is more reasonable for a given person. Then another thing concerning culture here as well, that culture is unnatural. All of those like movements and again, that part of human heritage is unnatural. Some abstract human heritage, let's say, is unnatural. Since day one of existence of humanity, they started studying nature. When they learned to do that, they started depicting their life, because that gave them better understanding of their placement in nature. It started us answering their questions. There was a need for that. Culture would not have existed. Artists would not have wanted to expand their skill. Artists would have not been studying the laws of perspective, the lighting and stuff, if it was not natural. But art and culture are those like things that allow us to reproduce nature and find the depiction, find some common ground, some common cultural ground through imagery that we pull from our collective consciousness. This universal language was an inherent property of humans, and they had an immense drive to elevate it, to bring it to higher mastery. And I'm, as an artist, understand that. There's also some insane force that passes through you when you enter the creative process, when you are working with the objects, when you bypass your active rational consciousness and you are in the unhinged creative process, creative flow. When you're creating the objects of culture, it's an insane ecstatic experience, and it's totally natural for humans. And the fact that culture exists is an insane great advancement. It's another tool that people use to study the world around them, and it totally has all place to exist. But the thing is that now that we have so much heritage, it becomes very difficult for people to actually embrace it fully. It requires a lot of brain capacity to do that, to study, to understand it. And this is why in some instances for people it becomes difficult, and they try to reduce its value, they try to devaluate it. that of course it has its place because it is hard. But at the same time, awareness of the human heritage also facilitates our further development. And further development is necessary for us to feel the value, because otherwise, when we don't see the meaning, when we don't see anything to strive for, we stop recognizing the need to actually strive to live and do something to improve our quality of life. That's another big message of mine, is that people need something to look forward to, something bigger than biology, something bigger than something basic, some grand idea to live. People need to know that there is a bigger pleasure in life in order to strive to live well, in order to strive to be healthy, in order to strive to find the answers on how to optimize their quality of life. This is a big thing of mine. I think that a lot of people, they remain with their own will. They remain unhealthy, they remain living in poor conditions that they could afford just because they don't see the thrill, they don't have anything to look forward to, basically. So this is why it's important to know the human heritage, to respect it, to love it, to embrace it, and to see where it could develop further. And that's a complex problem, but that's a new leap of human brain development. And there's nothing scary about it, we just need to learn how to use it. The people should reproduce on the first, like girls should reproduce on the first cycle, people should marry early and practice monogamy. This is also unreasonable, especially in the modern world. And what I noticed from the personal observations, because I went through school, I met a lot of people. I noticed that girls naturally don't run with the steam to reproduce on their first cycle, because when the girl hits the active phase of puberty, usually it takes many months or years to actually come to agreement with it, because it's a huge psychological reconstruction of everything, because you suddenly have different hormones, so you suddenly unlock some different function of the body. So there must be some adjustment time to break into that. And what I noticed from the real life, that girls naturally, without any external force, would pursue intimate life after 3-4 years since the beginning of their cycle. The only girls who had active intimate life at the age of 13 in my school, their periods started at 9-10 years old. And the girls whose period started at 13, they typically, again, average from my personal observations, they started intimate life at the age of 17-18. So there is this period of time, it's some readjustment. At the same time, when I think about the girls who did start intimate life at the age of 13, because their period started several years prior to that, there was no force, no social programming, no artificial, wrong, unnatural social influence that prevented them from doing that whenever they were doing that. Literally, there was nothing that was preventing them from engaging in those activities. The same way there was nothing preventing the girls who started doing this at the age of 17, 18, 19, there was nothing in their lives that would prevent them from doing that. Whenever a person matures fully physically and psychologically, that's when they start doing it, and there's nothing that can stop them. Because when you start doing this at the age of 12, 13, yes, there is a possibility for receiving some judgment from others. But it's individual. If a person is mature enough, they feel like they can do that, it happens effortlessly. And there's again, no force, no external force that could limit them from doing that. And at the age of 12, I was invited by one cool boy to kiss behind the school. I didn't want to do that. I was not ready for that. Yes, childhood sexuality does exist, but it doesn't mean that it's the same as adults. Even in adults, people sometimes fantasize about something, but it doesn't mean that they go and implement those fantasies in real life, because in our fantasies, in our psyche, we have distortions. We have tunnel vision. So we cannot embrace the full picture. We cannot embrace the reality when we have tunnel vision about something. And so it doesn't mean that if sexuality exists, that it needs to be practiced at the level of an adult who already overcame all of those developmental phases and can just perform it effortlessly. It takes time. It's a feature, it's a function that takes time to mature, just like any other function. The brain development, the first spurt of brain development happens over the course of 3 years, the first exponential development of the brain. The child develops slow. The human in general develops gradually. To say that everybody should start giving birth after the first cycle is a complete, it's wrong. It's just wrong. Plus, again, you need to take into account the natural variability in the brain development and the features, individual variability in interests, in some genetic inclinations. Because there are people who are naturally more creative, who live more in the neocortex, and there are people who are more rooted in their biology, whose brain develops to service specifically their biological needs. But there are people who become intellectuals, there are people who become more, again, abstract thinkers, who become creators, artists, whoever. They have a totally different path for their creativity to be realized and fulfilled. There's monogamy and reproduction, prioritizing quantity of children. That would be natural. In general, if we look at what's natural in animals, animals usually prioritize quality over quantity, even animals, because in the times when they cannot ensure that their offspring will be successfully born and raised, they desorb the embryos, they desorb the fetuses, and if the offspring is born, they oftentimes cannibalize their children because they cannot raise them well. Because in nature is strategic. Nature understands that if you produce a lot of the offspring that will be weak, it will lead to full degeneration of species. So it's better to strategize the process of reproduction and leaving the offspring in a way that you produce normal, optimal population with strength, as opposed to producing a lot of the population which is withered. So this is what happens naturally, which means that if we look at the prehistoric carnivore communities, their birth rate was survival of offspring was much smaller than that of agricultural tribes, or agricultural communities. Yes, it led to much weaker population, but in terms of reproduction, in terms of reproductive strategy, it appears that the communities that were carnivore, they produced less. And like net reproduction was less than that of agricultural communities. It also makes it counterintuitive if we think about carnivores being natural, appended to the fact that people need to reproduce a lot. And then typically where people reproduce a lot, eventually it balances out the resources and the offspring starts getting attacked by infections, wars, like hunger in general. So there are some external factors that will shrink that population to its optimal value. Again, so it's all self-balancing system. This is why I don't think that when you have resources to produce high-quality offspring, you should strive to produce a ton of offspring. Because a ton of offspring, which will mean the reduction in resources per person and will lead to the reduction of some external and more brutal reduction in the number of offspring and population. It all will be self-balanced. Then another thing is monogamy. Monogamy is not natural. Monogamy may be natural if your lifespan is very short in nature. But monogamy is a totally unnatural construct that humans invented because they started living in more, they developed the concept of romantic love. Again, the monogamy is the product of only the strategic part of our brain. There are only a handful of species that practice monogamy, again, and it was designed in favor of their offspring. But monogamy is not natural for humans. Humans are polygamous. Otherwise, statistically majority of people would not be looking for having multiple mates. People would not have attraction to anybody else. People would not be looking at anybody else when they're in a relationship. But people still find other people attractive. People have the sense of falling in love. People do have that. If monogamy was normal, people would not have a sense of acutely falling in love. That would end. The fact that people have a short spurt of falling in love, like honeymoon phase, indicates that monogamy is not natural. Otherwise, that falling in love would not have existed, or it would have lasted the entire life. But on average, again, people, especially people with less developed, maybe emotional intelligence or something like that, less developed awareness, they usually are very frustrated in monogamous relationships. It's not an easy task for people without some higher, unnatural understanding of things. So naturally, monogamy is not natural, and polygamy should be practiced. That's what would be natural if we think about this hypothetical scenario of following our direct impulses. So this is another contradiction in the naturalist teachings, in the naturalist dogma. And while we're on the word dogma, without a dogma that very strongly resembles a religious belief with the basis of naturalistic ideas, this naturalistic community would not be sustained. Look at Amish populations. They are one good example. They decided that, okay, human progress that was created after the 19th century, so when there was a huge spurt in development of electrodynamic and quantum physics, we reject all the progress that came with discovery of electrodynamic and conceptualization and practical applications of electrodynamic laws. So they're like, okay, we reject this part of reality, we reject this part of physics, we will say that all progress that was performed before the 19th century is good, everything that was performed after the 19th century is bad. So they live like that. They have a very strong ideological programming that is also totally artificial because progress is natural, but they need to suppress that in order to live in this community. They have certain clothing that's very specific clothing. They eat certain foods, just like any religious communities. They have super strict rules that encompass everything. Like literally, they have rules for every area of life that keeps them stable. If you go to any Orthodox Jewish community, they have 2 kitchens because they need to keep dairy and meat separate. When they eat any plants, they cannot have any bugs. So there are those kashrut laws that regulate what you eat and how you eat. There's a kosher law that also tells you which foods to eat, which foods to not eat. So you need to swim in a certain swimming pool and cleanse yourself periodically. So there are rituals. You need to burn the candles. You need to observe Shabbat. Those are the religious rules that you need to submit your life to in order to remain inside of this system of belief. The same will happen with naturalism. So there will be an impingement on your natural impulses, actually, even though naturalism preaches you to follow your impulses. But in the end, when you start building a system out of it, you will have to have rules that will be regulating the communities that follow this lifestyle, that will bring you to the state of oppression of the self. In order for the system to survive, in order for the system to continue. In general, when you bring anything to the systemic level, that starts limiting individual freedoms in some areas, and they start, again, like with Amish, it's prohibited. So yeah, 19th century starts, like electrodynamics starts, it's prohibited. You can be as much curious to explore that, you can be as curious as you want to study the computing, to study electricity, to start electrodynamics. You cannot use it. So it becomes a level of the fairy tale. So it limits your natural curiosity. It's not physiological, it's not normal. Which proves again that naturalism in its this dogmatic anti-progress form is unnatural. It just contradicts to the concept of itself. Because again, it will lead to suppression of natural processes and impulses of the human, physical or intellectual. This is not to undermine the role of, yes, we need to see what is optimal for us as a whole and for each individual. Yes, it's normal that we go through experiments. Like again, the subject of veganism, I tried raw veganism, I experimented with other things, and I found in this optimization problem that veganism doesn't work. This and this alternative thing works better. I'm pursuing it. When something starts being wrong, I will start pursuing something else and I will be solving the optimization problem. That's how life progresses, and it's only the diet. We have so many problems like that to solve in life. But something to remember, that we are not born into a vacuum. We cannot stop the progression of human development. The world that we live in is perfect and in accordance to everything that we've collectively, through trial and error and through the tests of time, came up with. We could not have developed into anything else. This is literally the outcome of super multivariable problem. It's literally the natural progression. It's like you shuffle a lot of things. I don't know what would be a good example. You know how in physics you have distributions. that obey certain laws, like Gaussian law, like Boltzmann's law. There are several distributions, and they have a peak. And that peak depends on the collective contributions of the events, basically, of some general laws. And you have multiple of them. You have multiple bound systems interacting, and they come to equilibrium. And again, within one generation, it might seem scary. Oh my God, what's happening in this country, that country, this phenomenon, these elections and stuff like that. But in the grand scheme of things, the outcomes of all of those processes are, first of all, they are predetermined by a vast number of events that self-optimize. The outcomes of those things are also the most optimal for the system nowadays. We can argue that, there are elites influencing everything. Why are they in power? Why are they influencing things? The fact that, oh my God, some powers stole powers from some tribes or people. Why? Because there likely was a problem that led to people settling for that solution. It was the most optimal for survival and proliferation. Because in life, everybody solves their own problems. Because everything that we see around us is the outcome of the individual decisions of each person. And the best thing you can do to live naturally is to live true to yourself. Like I did when I was little. The true to myself would be to, for example, paint, read a lot of literature, and dance and sing and perform. That was my nature. Nobody forced me to do that. It was literally my nature that nothing could suppress. No events could suppress. It was natural for me. If someone told me that at the age of 12 I needed to marry someone and start reproducing, I would do this because my nature was to paint and do sciences, dream, read, and explore the world around me. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to do something cool in life. I loved the world. I would not want to limit myself to fulfillment of somebody else's idea of what normal biological life should be. It would be unnatural. So to me, it would be unnatural to pursue somebody else's idea of what is natural. I voted with my actions. I voted with my genetics, and my genetics came from something. It was literally centuries of selection to develop me. Centuries of progress to develop me, to be raised by people who had also who were also influenced by the previous generations to develop me. It was a totally natural thing. It would be unnatural for me to artificially suppress all of this vastness of what nature created out of me to fulfill some abstract idea of somebody. It's counterproductive, for once. It's not logical, and it's not natural. So this is my take on that. Write what you think below. If you consider yourself to be a naturalist, what do you agree or disagree with me? And if you have some arguments, write them down. Even though I resist to usually engage in those like drunk kitchen conversation style, because they usually don't lead to anything. And they always boil to this thing that I promised to announce in the beginning, and I think I already mentioned it, that our life is the solution of some particular cases, of particular problems that we can control. Because we control only our private life largely. And then from decisions, from optimizing our personal choices, from our personal comfort, we come up with some new leap of global development. And with this in mind, I always preach, and perhaps will be preaching, I can be sure, that everyone should maximize everything that defines them and that they value, and maximize their creatorship potential and realize it through actions. Because that is the only way we can efficiently evolve and live in harmony. But with that in mind also, there are people who are not aware of that, who will never hear this message, and who will not ever want to hear it or will never be able to understand it. And they also define the path of evolution. They also have a role in nature. And they also have right to exist and do whatever they think is right. Even if we call it brainwashing, because everybody's brainwashed. Again, we're not born into a vacuum. So that's my take.